The signal began as nothing more than a flicker, static across the edge of a deep space relay. For most civilizations, it would have been dismissed, nothing more than background noise carried on the endless tides of the void. But this signal was different. It carried rhythm, deliberate pulses that no natural star or drifting nebula could produce. It was the kind of sound that made technicians freeze at their stations, the kind of sound that silenced entire command decks. Because everyone knew, the only beings who sent signals like this were the ones the galaxy feared to even whisper about: the humans, the Deathworlders. Across the outer edges of the alien domains, stations monitored the void with ancient patience. Some had sat quiet for centuries, their sensors sweeping like watchful guardians, catching only the faint hum of cosmic winds. But when the signal came, entire systems lit up. Alarms rang through orbital fortresses. Fleets stirred from slumber. The pulse repeated, coded, purposeful. And every commander who received it knew immediately that this was not meant for them. It was meant for someone else. Someone moving. Someone coming. The humans were on the march, in the grand halls of the Arkan Dominion, where crystal spires touched the skies and the stars themselves were charted like holy texts. The council gathered in hurried silence. For generations, they had warned each other of this day. The humans had always been too quiet, too still, their fleets rarely seen beyond their claimed borders. But when they appeared, they never came small. Entire armadas followed them. Not scavenger groups, not isolated colonies, but fleets large enough to reshape entire regions of space. And now, the pulse, the signal that heralded their coming, had crossed into Dominion space. Out along the frontier, ordinary colonists looked up from their daily work to see the night sky disturbed by strange lights. Cargo ships whispered rumors. Traveling merchants carried fragments of fear. The story spread faster than any official message. The Deathworlder fleet was moving. The pulse had been received in multiple sectors. None of them knew what it meant, only that it carried a weight of inevitability, as if the galaxy itself had been waiting for this moment. On a lonely outpost near the border, a single officer leaned forward, staring at the console as the pattern repeated. The crew muttered nervously, each repetition making their unease grow. Sharper. It wasn't a message in their language, yet somehow it felt personal, each beat like the strike of a war drum. "They're announcing themselves," one of the younger crew whispered, voice barely holding steady. And the officer knew he was right. This wasn't secrecy. This wasn't stealth. The Deathworlders wanted the galaxy to hear them coming. Far away, the humans themselves prepared in silence. Their ships, forged in places where planets tried to kill every life form that dared walk upon them, were heavier, harsher, more resilient than anything else the galaxy had built. Their crews were born on worlds of storms, earthquakes, and predators with teeth sharper than steel. They called their vessels fleets, but to other species, they were more like moving mountain ranges armed with fire. And now, these mountains were moving into alien skies. Whispers filled the alien courts. Some argued the humans were responding to an insult. Others feared it was vengeance for an act long forgotten. A few dared to believe it was protection, that perhaps, somewhere in the shadows, another power had risen, and the humans were marching not against the Dominion, but through it. But no one knew. That uncertainty was what made the signal worse. It wasn't just the sound of war, it was the sound of inevitability. In marketplaces, traders from distant systems spread wild tales. They said the humans carried with them machines that could tear apart suns. They said no blockade could halt them, no weapon could match them. Others laughed it off, calling it exaggeration. But the laughter never lasted long, because in every heart, alien or otherwise, there was the unspoken knowledge. The Deathworlders did not bluff. When they moved, they meant it. The Dominion military scrambled. Fleets were pulled from quiet patrol routes and rushed to the frontier. Captains checked weapons that had not been fired in decades. Generals debated whether to prepare for defense or send envoys. But all the while, the signal pulsed through their systems. A constant reminder that choices were running out. Out in the dark, the first shadows appeared. Human ships, black against the stars, their engines leaving trails like fire across the void. They did not hide. They advanced with precision, each movement deliberate, each formation built for war. Scouts reported sighting them and then cut transmissions short, as though even speaking too long of their presence risked drawing attention. And, still, no one knew why they came. The humans had not spoken. They had not sent demands. Only that endless pulse, the signal that spread faster than light, faster than reason, into every corner of alien space. On the outermost Dominion world, where the fleet was most likely to arrive first, the people gathered at the edge of their cities, staring at the sky. Some prayed to old gods, others prepared their weapons. Children were told stories of monsters that lived beyond the stars, stories meant to frighten them into obedience. And now, those stories seemed ready to step into the light. The officer on the frontier station received new orders. Hold position. Watch the void. Report movement. His crew shifted uneasily, each face pale under the dim glow of the consoles. The signal had grown stronger now, louder in the system, echoing through every piece of equipment. It was as though the humans wanted them to feel it in their bones. And then, as the officer leaned forward once more, the signal changed. The steady rhythm shifted, forming a new pattern. It was slower this time, more deliberate. He realized with a sudden chill that it wasn't random. It was words, not in their tongue, not in any known language. But somehow every crew member understood it at the same time. The meaning cut through translation, cut through culture, cut through fear. The humans were not hiding. They were not apologizing. They were not asking permission. The signal carried only one message: we are here. And as the crew looked out into the darkness beyond the station's windows, lights began to appear. First one, then dozens, then hundreds, engines burning like stars. Moving as one, drawing closer. The Deathworlder fleet had arrived, and no one knew whether this was salvation or the beginning of the end. The lights in the distance grew brighter, spreading across the void like an advancing storm. From the observation deck of the frontier station, the crew could see them now, shapes too massive to be mistaken for anything but warships. Their outlines were sharp, forged for survival, with armor plates that seemed to drink in the starlight. The humans had arrived, and their silence was more unsettling than any declaration of war. Reports poured in across Dominion channels, each one carrying fragments of the same truth. Entire sectors had detected the signal. Dozens of listening posts confirmed the presence of the human fleet crossing deeper into alien domains. And yet, still no words, no explanation, only the steady pulse that now filled every channel like a beating heart. The signal was not blocked or hidden. It was everywhere, impossible to ignore. In the capital of the Dominion, the council chamber was filled with unease. Generals stood beside robed ministers, their voices rising as fear bled into anger. They demanded answers. Why had the humans chosen this moment to march? Was it punishment for some forgotten slight? A test of strength? Or was it something larger, something the Dominion itself had no part in? The possibility that the humans were chasing a threat greater than any empire was whispered but never spoken aloud, because if it were true, then what kind of enemy would drive the Deathworlders to cross so far from their own borders? Across the frontier, soldiers were deployed to defensive stations. Pilots strapped themselves into fighters, their hands trembling as they gripped control sticks. They had been trained to face pirates, raiders, even rival empires. But the Deathworlders were not just another rival. They were something else entirely. Stories passed through the ranks. half legend, half warning, tales of humans fighting battles, in impossible environments, volcanic landscapes, frozen wastelands, oceans of acid. Their ability to endure what others could not had given them the title Deathworlders, and no one who carried that name was underestimated. Among the human fleet, preparation was quiet and methodical. Inside the steel halls of their colossal ships, crews moved with discipline. They were used to being feared, used to the way the galaxy saw them, yet none of them thought of themselves as monsters. To them, survival was not cruelty, but necessity. Generations of hardship had shaped them. Worlds that tried to kill them had taught them resilience. Now, as they crossed into alien domains, their eyes were set on a goal known only to their commanders. The fleet did not come to wander. It came with purpose. The purpose was hidden even from most of their own. Rumors circled through human ships just as they did through alien space. Some whispered of a colony lost beyond the frontier, a settlement wiped out by forces unknown. Others spoke of signals older than this one, of warnings buried in cosmic radiation, patterns only humans had recognized. A few dared to suggest the fleet moved not for conquest, but for survival, chasing an enemy that threatened them all. But speculation was meaningless when orders were absolute. In Dominion markets and taverns, fear became currency. Merchants sold survival gear at triple the price. Traders spoke in hushed tones, debating whether to flee deeper into Dominion territory or gamble on moving away entirely toward neutral stars. Civilian ships clogged travel lanes, desperate to escape the path of the approaching humans. Entire planets buzzed with panic, though none of them had yet seen the fleet with their own eyes. The signal was enough. Back on the frontier station, the officer watched as the lights grew closer. He had served long enough to know that this was no simple maneuver. The humans were advancing in perfect formation, their engines glowing in unison, their ships aligned with military precision. And yet their weapons remained cold. No shots fired, no threats broadcast. Just that endless signal, pulsing like the breath of something alive. The officer couldn't shake the thought that the signal was not just a warning, but a test, a measure, to see who would stand, who would run, and who would break under the pressure of silence. Further inside Dominion space, analysts tried to break the code of the pulse. Machines parsed its frequency, scholars dissected its rhythm, priests even searched it for divine meaning. But the result was always the same. It was simple, deliberate, and impossible to misinterpret. The message had already been understood when it first appeared. We are here. And that was all the humans needed to say. Alien governments beyond the Dominion began to take notice. Neighboring powers watched nervously, unsure whether to intervene or to stand aside. Some hoped the humans would bleed the Dominion, weakening their influence. Others feared that if the humans were not stopped here, they would keep advancing and no borders would hold them. Alliances began to fracture before a single shot had been fired. Meanwhile, in the outer reaches of the Dominion, ordinary people waited under the shadow of the unknown. A farmer working in his fields paused to look at the sky, knowing that whatever came next would decide not only his fate, but the fate of generations. A merchant's child asked why the stars seemed brighter than before, and no answer given could calm the trembling in her parent's voice. The human fleet pressed onward, its size becoming clear now. Not dozens of ships, but hundreds. Warships, carriers, support craft, all moving with single-minded unity. Each one bore scars from battles long past, armor pitted and scorched, yet still functional, still deadly. To the aliens watching, the sight was terrifying, but to the humans, it was a reminder of why they had survived so long. Every scar was proof of endurance. The Dominion generals debated strategy. Should they confront the humans at the border, or fall back and prepare for defense deeper inside their space? Every option carried risk. Confronting them might trigger war, retreating might invite invasion. But the humans gave them no answers, only the relentless advance of steel and fire. On the frontier station, the officer finally gave a quiet order. Activate long-range scans. Watch for any change. His crew obeyed, their screens lighting with data. And then, a new anomaly appeared. Beyond the human fleet, far back in the void, something else stirred. At first it seemed like debris, a shadow, against the stars. But as the scans deepened, its size became clearer. It was not debris. It was not natural. It was something vast, something moving. The officer's heart tightened as he realized the truth. The humans were not alone. He could not yet tell if it was an ally, an enemy, or something far worse. But whatever it was, the humans had brought it with them, or were chasing it. And suddenly the silence of the signal felt less like a threat, and more like a warning. The fleet drew closer. The pulse continued. The Dominion held its breath, and somewhere in the dark behind the Deathworlders, something immense was coming. The signal did not stop. It pulsed through the Dominion's vast communication web, unstoppable and unbroken, a steady reminder that the Deathworlders were already inside their borders. Entire sectors could hear it. On distant colony worlds, it echoed through emergency channels, shaking families who had never seen a human ship in their lives. On military outposts, it throbbed like a heartbeat that no one could silence. The signal carried no threats, no demands, only presence. And that presence was more terrifying than any declaration of war. On the frontier station, the officer stood with his crew as the massive human fleet grew clearer in the void. The ships were colossal, their profiles jagged and functional, without the graceful arcs of Dominion vessels. Each one looked like a predator born from metal and fire, scars running across their hulls from battles that had left other fleets in ruins. Yet what unsettled the officer most was not their appearance, but their silence. These were warships built for destruction, and yet they advanced without firing a single shot, letting the signal speak for them. The Dominion Council ordered a delegation to be prepared. A convoy of diplomats, escorted by heavily armed cruisers, was sent toward the human fleet with the mission to open dialogue. But even as they departed, voices rose in the chamber, warning that approaching the Deathworlders might invite disaster. Others argued the opposite, that not approaching would guarantee it. The council could not agree, and so the diplomats carried. With them not just words of peace, but the weight of indecision. Meanwhile, among the human fleet, life moved with mechanical rhythm. The crews trained, checked systems, and waited for orders they were not yet allowed to understand. Many of them did not know why they had crossed into Dominion space, only that the signal marked their path. Rumors ran through their ranks. Some whispered of a missing colony wiped out by something lurking in the dark, others of ancient enemies that had stirred from hiding. A few believed the fleet was here for conquest, though most dismissed the idea. The humans did not conquer for sport. Their survival was hard-earned, and they had no desire to stretch themselves thin. Still, uncertainty gnawed at every mind. Among the Dominion civilians, fear became daily life. Markets emptied as food and supplies were hoarded. Refugees fled from border worlds, their ships crowding safe lanes as they scrambled toward the core. Stories spread like wildfire. Some said the humans were coming to enslave. Others claimed they were here to defend against a greater danger. The truth didn't matter. The fear did. On the frontier station, the officer's crew monitored the anomaly behind the human fleet. It remained distant, shadowed, almost reluctant to reveal itself. At times, it vanished from sensors entirely, as if it could bend itself out of detection. Then, it would reappear, vast and unmistakable, drifting closer in the human's wake. The officer kept the discovery quiet, reporting it only to high command. He suspected the humans were not here to attack, but to hold the line against whatever followed them. But suspicion was not enough. No one in the Dominion trusted humans enough to believe they could come as anything but destroyers. In the great fleets of the Dominion, captains argued among themselves. Some demanded they mobilize and meet the Deathworlders head-on to show strength before fear undermined discipline. Others believed patience was their only chance, that provoking the humans would end in annihilation. Fleets drifted into new positions. Blockades formed along key trade lanes. But no order to engage was given. The commanders waited, watching the slow advance of human ships like hunters staring at a predator that had wandered too close. In the human flagship, the admiral studied charts projected before him. His expression was unreadable, but his officers knew he carried the truth of their mission. They also knew he would not reveal it until the time was right. Beneath the quiet hum of engines and the endless thrum of the signal, tension spread among the crews. They were not afraid of the Dominion. They had fought harder wars than this, but of the unknown. The presence trailing them was no rumor. Every human ship knew it was there. And if it had driven them this far into alien domains, then it was not something they could face lightly. The Dominion diplomats finally reached the human fleet. Their escorts were dwarfed by the massive human warships, their cruisers looking fragile beside hulking carriers and armored battleships. As they opened communication channels, they expected demands, ultimatums, threats. Instead, the humans offered only a single message, short and unsettling. "Stand aside," the Dominion delegation pressed for more, asking why the humans had entered their space, what their intentions were, whether war was coming. But the humans gave no explanations. They repeated only the same words, calm and cold. "Stand aside." The diplomats returned shaken, their escorts trailing back to Dominion space with more questions than answers. The council erupted. Some interpreted the message as arrogance, others as warning. The possibility that the humans were not here for them at all crept into the chamber like smoke, but no one dared to state it plainly. The Dominion had built its power on control, and now control was slipping. To admit that something greater than both their empire and the Deathworlders might be moving in the dark was too much for most to bear. Back on the frontier, the officer and his crew finally received orders. Hold their position, observe, and prepare for contact. They knew what it meant. They were bait. If the humans turned hostile, they would be the first to burn. Yet no one deserted. No one disobeyed. They stood at their posts, staring at the lights that now filled half the sky. The Deathworlder fleet had arrived in full, and still, beyond them, the shadow stirred. Some nights it seemed to pulse in rhythm with the human signal, as if mocking it. Other nights it drifted closer, stretching its vast form like something alive. The officer began to fear that the humans were not just being followed. They were being hunted. Rumors within the Dominion military began to grow darker. Scouts had gone missing. Ships sent to monitor the outer sectors failed to return. Whispers spoke of fleets vanishing into the dark, leaving only silence behind. Each disappearance was hushed by the council, but the truth could not be hidden forever. Something else was moving out there, something that even the Deathworlders had chosen not to name. And yet, the humans pressed forward, their ships cutting through space like a tide. Every alien eye watched them, every heart braced for the strike. That had not yet come. The Dominion prepared its fleets, sharpened its defenses, and argued among itself. But the humans had already made their decision. They were here. They would not turn back. And as the shadow behind them drew closer, the signal pulsed louder, faster, like the beat of a drum before a storm. The human fleet drifted deeper into Dominion territory, their ships vast shadows against the stars. The signal still pulsed, but now it carried a sharper rhythm, as if the beat itself had quickened. Every Dominion station, every patrol, every civilian world in range felt it echoing through their systems. People whispered that it was no longer simply an announcement of presence, it was a countdown. The council chamber was in chaos. Ministers demanded immediate retaliation, generals demanded a defensive wall, and merchants screamed about the collapse of trade routes. None of them had answers, only fear. The human fleet had not attacked, yet every moment of silence felt like a blade pressed closer to the throat. The Dominion had never faced an enemy who entered their space without words of conquest. The lack of explanation was worse than open war. It left everyone waiting for the first strike, not knowing when or where it would fall. On the frontier station, the officer stood at his post as the shadow behind the human fleet began to reveal itself in sharper detail. The scans painted a picture no one wanted to believe. It was not a single ship, not even a fleet. It was larger than that. Vast forms, too far for clear reading, moved in silence behind the humans. At times, they seemed to stretch into impossible shapes, bending light and distorting readings. Whatever they were not Dominion designs, nor any known empires. They were something else, something ancient and cold. The officer realized then what terrified him most. The humans were not advancing like conquerors. They were advancing like defenders, putting themselves between the Dominion and the approaching shadow. He wanted to send this thought to high command, to make them understand. But even if he did, who in the council would listen? To suggest that the humans had come as a shield rather than a sword was unthinkable to leaders who had spent centuries painting them as monsters. In the human fleet, preparations shifted. Crews worked in silence, loading weapons, calibrating shields, running drills with grim efficiency. The admiral still had not revealed the full truth, but the officers knew enough. Whatever followed them was close now. The fleet was not here to frighten the Dominion for sport. It was here to hold the line. Orders were whispered in low voices across human ships. No aggression unless fired upon, no diversion from the signal, hold formation no matter the cost. The Dominion fleets began to form a barrier. Dozens of ships stretched into defensive lines. Energy weapons primed, fighters launched to patrol the dark. Yet the commanders could not agree on how close to let the Deathworlders come. Too close and they risked being overwhelmed. Too far, and they risked leaving their own colonies exposed. Every choice carried the weight of disaster. Civilians on frontier worlds could see the sky filling with unfamiliar stars. The human ships glowed like embers, vast and heavy, while the Dominion fleets formed arcs of light around their planets. Children asked why the night looked different. Parents told them to stay indoors, as if walls could shield them from the scale of what was coming. Tension reached its breaking point when the Dominion finally sent an order to one of their fleets. Intercept the humans, force them to halt, demand. Answers at the edge of weapons range. The fleet commander carried out his orders with iron resolve. Dozens of Dominion warships surged forward, weapons locked but not yet fired, forming a wall before the advancing Deathworlders. For the first time, two powers faced each other openly in the void. The humans did not break formation. They did not. Slow. They moved steadily as if the Dominion ships were no more than obstacles in the path of a tide. The Dominion commander sent repeated transmissions. Stand down, halt your advance, explain your incursion. Each one was met with silence, save for the signal pulsing through every frequency. The commander clenched his fists as the Deathworlders pressed closer and closer still until weapons locks screamed on both sides. On the frontier station, the officer's crew sat frozen as the first human ships passed into weapons range. The Dominion line held, energy weapons charged to full power, missile racks armed. Every sensor screamed of imminent battle. The crew whispered prayers under their breath, waiting for the first spark that would unleash fire across the stars. But the spark did not come from the Dominion. It did not come from the humans. It came from behind. The shadow moved. The anomaly that had stalked the fleet now surged forward, breaking across sensors like a storm. What had seemed like scattered fragments resolved into sharp outlines, vast and alien, unlike any vessel ever recorded. They were not sleek or elegant like Dominion ships, nor brutal and functional like human designs. They were something older, colder, shapes that shifted unnaturally in the void, their presence bending light around them. And when they emerged, the signal changed. The pulse, steady for so long, now thundered faster, like a heartbeat racing toward collapse. The Dominion fleet turned its weapons instinctively toward the new arrivals. Panic bled into their transmissions as captains shouted for identification, for orders, for anything to make sense of what they saw. But no answers came. The only sound was the human signal, hammering louder now as the Deathworlders shifted their formation. For the first time, human ships moved with urgency. Their vast carriers turned, heavy warships rotating to face the shadow behind them. The humans had not come to fight the Dominion at all. They had come to prepare for this. And now, whatever they had been waiting for had arrived. On the Dominion command channel, arguments broke into screams. Some demanded immediate retreat, others insisted on firing on both sides. But the truth was plain to every soldier staring into the dark. The humans were not their only threat. The real enemy, had finally stepped forward. The officer on the station felt his chest tighten as the shadow loomed larger, dozens, no, hundreds of ships stretching across the void. He thought of the whispered stories, of scouts that had gone missing, of colonies that had fallen silent. It was all true. Something had been moving in the dark, devouring everything in its path. And now it had come to the Dominion, with the humans standing in its way. Weapons on all sides lit the void. Dominion ships locked onto the humans locked onto the shadow, and the shadow. The shadow simply advanced, undeterred by the threat of fire. Its ships did not hesitate, did not flinch, did not even slow. They moved like predators that had never known defeat. Civilians across the frontier saw it now, too. Strange lights blooming in the night sky, formations that stretched longer than their own moons. Panic tore through cities. Ships tried to flee, clogging the lanes with desperate broadcasts. No one could outrun what was coming, but flight was instinct, and fear ruled every mind. The Dominion commander gave the order to hold fire, waiting, to see who would act first. The human admiral gave no words, no speeches. His ship spoke for him, rotating as one to meet the shadow head-on. And then, for the first time, human voices broke through the signal. The transmission was clear, calm, unshaken. Hold your lines. Do not interfere. The words silenced Dominion channels. Some saw them as arrogance, others as warning, but the officer on the frontier station understood what they really were. They were instructions, given in the only way the humans knew how, direct and final. The human fleet began to advance, this time not into Dominion space, but back toward the dark. Every gun, every missile, every weapon was aimed at the shadow. The Deathworlders had chosen their enemy, and now all that remained was the question no one wanted to face. When the storm broke, would the Dominion stand with them or against them? The void grew brighter as the distance between the fleets closed. Weapons hummed, engines roared, and the signal pulsed so loud it felt as if it shook the bones of every living being who heard it. The galaxy held its breath. And then the first shadow ship lit its weapons. The first blast from the shadow fleet ripped across the void like lightning. Energy flared in impossible spectrums, bending sensors, frying Dominion equipment, and warping the very fabric of space around it. Entire Dominion vessels shuddered under the strain of simply being in range. The humans reacted instantly, their fleet tightening into layered walls of steel and fire. Cannons roared, missile bays opened, and in seconds, the silent Deathworlders unleashed a storm. For the first time since entering alien domains, they showed their true strength, and the void trembled under it. Dominion commanders stared in shock. The humans did not hesitate, did not test, did not probe. They fired with precision, each strike coordinated, each barrage meant to slow the advance of the shadow. Yet the enemy kept moving. Beams tore through the dark, consuming ships as if they were made of paper. Every Dominion officer watching knew they could not have survived such fire. And yet the human fleet endured, shields flaring, armor blackening, but line after line holding firm. But then something unexpected happened. The Shadow Fleet did not focus on the humans. At first, their weapons returned fire, matching the Deathworlders. Strike for strike. But soon, their lines bent, not toward the humans, but toward the Dominion fleets scattered beyond. The officer on the frontier station watched as Dominion ships, unprepared and poorly positioned, lit up like dying stars. Screams filled communication channels as entire squadrons vanished in bursts of fire. That was when the realization struck. The humans were not the target. The Dominion was. The humans had simply gotten in the way. The council in the Dominion capital was thrown into chaos as the reports arrived. What they had feared, that the Deathworlders had come to invade, was suddenly inverted. The real invaders were something else entirely. The humans, long regarded as nightmares, were not the spear, but the shield. The shadow had been following them, but not because it feared them. It was hunting. And now, with the Dominion exposed, it struck without mercy. The twist spread like fire across every Dominion world. Fear of the humans was replaced with something far worse. The terror of an unknown enemy that no one had stories for. The Deathworlders could be hated, resisted, fought. But this was something new, something no one had prepared for. On the human flagship, the Admiral finally broke his silence. His voice carried across every Dominion frequency, his words heavy but clear. You wanted answers. Here they are. This is why we came. Stand down, or stand with us. If you fire on us now, you will not live to regret it. For many in the Dominion, the message was a second shock. The humans had finally spoken, but instead of demands for surrender, they offered a choice. It was not mercy. It was necessity. The shadow was too vast, too relentless for any single fleet to withstand. On the frontier station, the officer's crew sat in stunned silence. Every fear they had about the Deathworlders seemed small now. He could see the shadow spreading across. The edge of the system, its numbers countless, its movements unnatural. The humans were fighting with everything they had, but even their mighty fleet was struggling to contain it. If the Dominion joined the fight, they might have a chance. If not, the Dominion would fall and the humans with it. Yet inside Dominion Command, not all were convinced. Some leaders still believed the humans had orchestrated the entire event, that the shadow was their creation, their weapon to weaken the Dominion before invasion. Fear and pride clashed with reason, and hesitation spread through their ranks. While they argued, ships burned. The human fleet pressed the attack, but as they fought, a new pattern emerged. The Shadow's weapons grew stronger the longer the battle raged, their strikes adapting to human defenses. Shields that once held now buckled, armor that endured now cracked. For every Shadow vessel destroyed, two more emerged from the dark. The humans were not winning. They were buying time. And then came the second twist, one no one expected. Dominion sensors lit with another surge of contacts, but these were not shadow ships. They were human. More fleets, dozens of them, emerging from hidden routes, silent, until now. The Dominion gasped as the scale of it became clear. The humans had not brought a single fleet. They had brought nearly everything they had. An armada so vast it had taken hidden gates and secret passages to move it unseen. The Dominion's fear deepened. If the humans had turned this force against them, no empire could have survived. And yet, here it was, throwing itself against the shadow without hesitation. The humans had gambled everything, risking extinction to stop whatever this enemy was. Still, the shadow did not falter. It pushed harder, spreading wider, targeting Dominion colonies now with precision. Civilian ships screamed for help as the void itself seemed to collapse around them. The humans redirected squadrons to shield the vulnerable, spreading their forces, thinner, their lines straining to hold. The signal that had begun this march pulsed even louder, now fused with battle commands, carrying coordination across the human armada. The Dominion officer on the frontier station listened as human commanders, gave orders not just to their own, but to any Dominion ships listening. Firing patterns, retreat paths, defensive grids, strategies spoken with the certainty of those who had fought this enemy before. The realization hit him like cold steel. This was not their first encounter. The humans had faced the shadow already, and they had lost too much to stay silent any longer. The Dominion fleets hesitated, caught between fear of the humans and fear of the shadow. Some captains broke orders and joined the fight, throwing their ships into human formations, weaving defenses together. Others pulled back, unwilling to believe, leaving their comrades to be slaughtered. The Dominion fractured, and the shadow exploited every weakness. On the human flagship, the admiral gave a new command, his voice sharper, colder. "If they will not fight with us, protect their people anyway." His officers obeyed without question. Human ships moved to cover Dominion retreat routes, shielding colonies even as Dominion guns still tracked them. It was madness, mercy, or both. And still, the shadow advanced. Its ships bent light, split into fragments, reformed in impossible ways. Some Dominion officers swore they saw them ripple like living things, their surfaces shifting as though made of liquid metal. Whatever. They were not machines as the galaxy understood them. They were something older, something alien in the truest sense. The officer on the station felt his fear harden into grim clarity. The humans had not come to conquer. They had come because they knew. And if even they could not stop this alone, then the galaxy stood on the edge of something far worse than war. The Dominion Council's final transmissions were filled with desperation. The ministers who had demanded the humans' destruction were now begging for unity. But their voices came too late. The shadow was here, and the decision was no longer in their hands. In the void, the human fleet shifted into a new formation, lines stretching wide, preparing for something larger than any strike yet seen. The signal thundered, the rhythm fast, and unrelenting, calling every ship, human or Dominion, that still lived to prepare. And then, deep within the shadow, something stirred. Larger than the rest, its presence blotted out the stars, its shape impossible to comprehend. It was not a fleet. It was something greater, a command, a hive, a core. The humans had been fighting its hunters. Now the predator itself had arrived. The void shook as it began to move. The vast form that emerged from the shadow was unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. It was not just size that unsettled every living soul who gazed upon it, but the way it seemed to fold reality around itself. Stars dimmed in its presence, light bent unnaturally, and Dominion scanners screamed with errors as they tried to capture its shape. To some, it looked like a fortress the size of a moon. To others, it seemed alive, its surface rippling as though it were breathing. Whatever it was, it dwarfed even the largest of the human carriers. And the humans, for the first time, since crossing the border, hesitated. The Dominion Council chamber fell silent as images of the colossal entity arrived. Even those who had doubted the humans' warnings could not deny the truth. This was not a fleet. It was something greater, something that had likely consumed fleets across the void and now came for them. Yet while fear gripped the Dominion leaders in the human fleet, the reaction was different. Officers moved with grim focus, as though this moment had been expected all along. Orders were given swiftly, formations shifted, and heavy weapons that had not yet fired were armed in unison. The humans had known it was coming, but just as the Shadow Titan prepared its first strike, another shock rippled through both fleets. Dominion sensors detected signals, new ones, echoing not from the humans or the Shadow, but from deep within Dominion space. At first, the data was dismissed as noise, but soon the truth emerged. Entire Dominion fleets stationed far from the front lines were turning on their own. Ships were firing on allies. Colonies were reporting betrayal from within. The Dominion was fracturing, and not by chance. The officer on the frontier station watched as encrypted codes scrolled across his screen, breaking into clear words. Dominion ships were not simply rebelling. They were answering. The Shadow's signal was not just power. It was influence. It was reaching into the minds of those who listened too long, twisting loyalty, corrupting thought. Crews who had heard, it pulsing through their systems for days, were now turning their weapons on their own kind. The signal was not only a call, it was infection. This revelation was a second twist, one that drove terror deeper than any weapon could. The humans had not come only to fight a physical enemy. They had come to contain the spread of this corruption before it consumed entire civilizations. And now the Dominion understood too late that their hesitation had already given the Shadow time to infect their people. The human admiral's voice cut through the storm of confusion. It spreads through thought, through fear. Do not listen. Do not repeat the pulse. Fight the silence with action, or you are already theirs. The words shook Dominion commanders to their core. For days, they had allowed the signal to echo across their systems, debating its meaning, dissecting its pattern. Now they realized they had let the poison sink in. Civilian colonies across the Dominion began to fracture under the influence. Families turned on neighbors. Local defense ships turned their weapons inward. On worlds closest to the frontier, riots broke out as panic mixed with whispers that were not their own. The Shadow was not just an enemy at the edge of space. It was already inside them. The humans moved with ruthless precision to contain it. Ships deployed jamming fields, not only to block the Shadow's attacks, but to silence its signal. Entire sectors of communication were shut down, leaving Dominion leaders blind and furious, but alive. Human forces fired not just on the Shadows, ships, but on Dominion vessels already compromised, targeting them with cold efficiency. To the Dominion, it looked like betrayal. To the humans, it was mercy before the corruption spread further. The Dominion Council split once again. Some shouted that the humans were seizing control, using the chaos to dismantle Dominion fleets and weaken their power. Others finally understood the truth, that without the humans, the Dominion would collapse in hours, consumed from within by the enemy's influence. But no decision could be made in time. The Shadow Titan began to move, and the void itself trembled. Its weapon was not like the others. The first wave had been beams of raw energy, but now the Titan exhaled something else, something unseen. The humans reacted instantly, their ships breaking formation and deploying fields of interference. The officer on the frontier station saw the readings spike across his console, and his stomach dropped. It wasn't a weapon meant to destroy ships. It was meant to spread faster, deeper. It was a broadcast of control, a command across wavelengths that reached every mind exposed. Crew members on Dominion ships began to scream, clutching their heads as if voices clawed at their thoughts. Some tore off comms, others fired their weapons wildly, unable to tell friend from foe. The corruption was no longer creeping. It was flooding, and yet the humans held. Their ships seemed hardened against it, their crews prepared. The officer realized then what separated them. The humans had grown up on worlds where survival meant resisting environments that attacked mind and body every day. Poisonous air, predators that lured with sound, landscapes that broke the will as easily as the bone. They had been tested for generations, forced to master fear itself. Against this new enemy, their greatest weapon was not their ships, but themselves. The Dominion had no such defense, and as the Shadow's signal spread, entire fleets wavered. The humans did not wait for permission. They moved to protect the Dominion civilians, even as Dominion commanders still debated whether to trust them. Squadrons broke off, covering. Retreating transports, intercepting shadow vessels with suicidal courage. Every strike delayed the advance of the Titan, but its presence only grew larger, its influence stretching further. The second twist was clear now. The war was not just for space or survival. It was for control of thought itself. If the Dominion fell to the Shadow's influence, the humans would be outnumbered, surrounded by enemies who once called themselves allies. The battle was no longer about borders. It was about the survival of free will in the galaxy. The officer on the station stared at the unfolding chaos and realized the Dominion's future hung on a choice it had not yet made. Stand with the humans, and maybe endure. Resist them, and fall into darkness. But as he looked into the void, watching the Shadow's Titan stretch across the stars, he knew the Dominion might already be too late. The human signal, once steady and simple, now blared across every channel it could reach. It was no longer just words of presence. It was a counterbeat, a defiance meant to drown out the Shadow's call. For the first time, Dominion soldiers who aligned their channels with the humans found clarity returning. The pulse of the Deathworlders was not just noise, it was shield and weapon both. Still, the Shadow pressed closer. The Titan's surface rippled again, and for a brief instant, every scanner caught the same impossible image. A structure within, its vastness like a cage, and inside it, something moving, something alive. The Shadow was not just a fleet, it was carrying prisoners. And if those prisoners were fueling its strength, then the battle was even more desperate than anyone had believed. The humans knew it. Their formations shifted again, bracing for a strike not just to destroy the Titan, but to pierce its core. And for the first time, the Dominion fleets that had survived began to align with them, not from trust, but from the raw terror of what they had seen. The void shook as the Titan opened its weapons once more, and the humans, with the Dominion now caught between doubt and survival, prepared for a clash that would decide whether thought itself remained free in the galaxy. The Titan loomed so large that it seemed less like a ship and more like a wound. In the galaxy itself, its surface rippled with shifting geometry, breaking scanners and bending light into twisted arcs. The Dominion fleets that had survived the initial onslaught hovered at the edges, scattered and fearful, while the human armada braced itself in full formation. The signal that had carried them here now pulsed with an urgent rhythm, not the calm announcement of their presence, but the thunder of a war drum calling all who still resisted to hold fast. The first exchange began with silence. The Titan did not roar or threaten. It simply moved, and when it did, the void itself trembled. Beams of energy cut across space, sweeping through the human lines. Massive carriers reeled under the force, shields flaring and failing, but their escorts surged forward to cover them. Human battleships answered with coordinated strikes, their guns unleashing storms of fire that pounded the Titan's vast hull. The void lit with fury, but for every scar burned into its surface, the Titan seemed to heal, shifting its form as though nothing could wound it for long. The Dominion, still paralyzed by doubt, watched as the Deathworlders threw themselves into the storm. To see humans fight was to witness a paradox. Fragile beings from hostile worlds who had built ships like mountains, crews who endured conditions that would break others, warriors who did not stop even as their vessels cracked around them. They fought not for conquest, not for glory, but with the simple resolve of those who refused to yield. Slowly, unwillingly, Dominion fleets began to move closer, their captains realizing that hesitation meant death for all. The officer on the frontier station followed every moment, his hands shaking as he relayed coordinates to human formations. His crew had long since stopped questioning whether the humans were friend or foe. They had seen the shadow's corruption, the way its pulse twisted minds, and they knew the humans were the only reason their station hadn't already been lost. For the first time in his service, he felt pride in defying his orders. He aligned his systems with the human signal, drowning out the shadow's call, and ordered his crew to fight alongside the Deathworlders. The battle surged toward the Titan. Squadrons of Dominion and human ships began to weave together, their firepower merging into vast patterns that hammered the enemy's defenses. For a moment, it seemed as though unity might finally break the Titan's hold. Then came the scream. The Das Titan released a new wave, not sound, not energy, but thought. A psychic blast tore through every ship in range, sending crews writhing as alien voices clawed at their minds. Dominion soldiers collapsed, some firing blindly on allies. Even hardened, human crews staggered, though they fought against it with teeth clenched and fists bloodied against control panels. The officer felt it too, a pressure inside his skull that whispered surrender, whispered obedience, whispered an end to all struggle. And then, beneath the whispers, came another sound. The human signal. Louder, stronger, defiant. It pulsed like a heartbeat through the madness, cutting through the Titan's control. Those who locked onto it felt their thoughts clear, their fear replaced by raw focus. The Dominion officers who tuned into the signal found their crews steadying, their soldiers, pulling themselves back from the brink. The humans were not just fighting with weapons, they were fighting with will, anchoring the galaxy against corruption. The human admiral's voice cut across every frequency, steady and sharp. Its core holds them. Break it or none of us leave, alive. The scans confirmed it. Inside the Titan, deep within its living structure, were shapes. Not cargo, not machinery, prisoners. The shadow was feeding on them, using their minds to amplify its influence. If they were not freed, the Titan would never fall. Every ship turned its weapons toward the core. The humans led the charge, Dominion fleets, rallying behind. The Titan's defenses flared, beams slicing through entire squadrons, but the combined firepower tore deeper with each strike. The void blazed with explosions. Wreckage drifted like broken stars, and still the humans pressed forward, their carriers disgorging waves of fighters that hurled themselves into the storm. At last, the Titan cracked. A wound tore open in its surface, light spilling from within. Dominion ships cheered, their hope reignited, but the humans did not slow. They knew victory was never so simple. The admiral ordered an assault straight into the wound, a suicide push into the heart of the shadow. Massive battleships plunged forward, clearing the path with fire, while escorts shielded them from counterstrikes. The Dominion, swept up in the momentum, followed. For the first time in the battle, the galaxy stood united. Inside the breach, the horror was revealed. Thousands of alien beings were entombed in chambers, their minds wired into the Titan's living structure. Some were Dominion, others from distant civilizations long thought lost. And among them, unmistakably, were humans. Faces pale, eyes empty. Their thoughts consumed by the shadow's will. This was the twist no one had expected. The humans had not simply discovered the shadow, they had already lost to it once before. These prisoners were their own, survivors of battles never spoken of, sacrificed to contain the enemy and left behind in silence. The realization hit every Dominion officer at once. The humans had carried the shadow into their space not by choice, but because they had been fighting it longer than anyone knew. Their silence, their secrecy, their sudden march across the stars, it had all been born from loss too great to admit. They had come not as invaders, but as the last survivors of a war already burning in the dark. The human fleet poured fire into the Titan's core, shattering chamber after chamber, freeing the prisoners within even as ships exploded around them. Each release weakened the Titan, its influence faltering as the chorus of enslaved minds broke apart. The Shadow's screams grew fainter, its weapons slower, its vast body trembling under the assault. But it was not finished. In its final act, the Titan began to collapse inward, its structure folding and twisting, drawing everything toward it like a black hole. Dominion fleets scrambled to escape, transports racing for safety, but the humans stayed. Their ships held the line, sacrificing themselves to keep the collapse contained, ensuring the Shadow could not consume the system with it. The admiral's last command echoed across all channels. "Go! Tell them! Fight it! Do not let it spread!" Dominion captains, once sworn enemies of the Deathworlders, now screamed orders to cover the human retreat. But there was none. One by one, human ships were torn apart, their sacrifices buying the galaxy a chance to breathe. The Titan imploded, in silence, vanishing into itself, leaving only wreckage and fire scattered across the stars. The officer on the frontier station stood among his crew, his eyes wet as he realized what had been given. The humans had not come to conquer. They had come to warn, to hold, to bleed so others could live. The Deathworlders who had terrified the galaxy for centuries were gone, not as monsters, but as saviors. And yet as the silence settled, the unexpected twist revealed itself. The signal still pulsed, weaker now, fractured, but still there. It came not from the wreckage, nor from surviving Dominion ships. It came from deeper in the void, far beyond the battlefield. The Titan had fallen, but it was not alone. The Shadow was not a single enemy, it was countless. The battle was over, but the war had only just begun. The void was silent after the collapse, a silence so heavy it pressed on every living soul that remained. Where the Titan had stood, there was now only a field of wreckage, drifting fragments glowing faintly as they cooled. The human fleet that had held the line was gone, reduced to scattered hulks and fading signals. The Dominion ships that had survived circled in stunned disbelief, their weapons still armed, though there was nothing left to fight. For the first time in centuries, the galaxy was united not by choice, but by the cost of survival. The officer on the frontier station stood at his console, staring at the empty space where the humans had been. His crew moved slowly, their voices hushed, as though they were afraid to break the quiet. Reports trickled in from across the sector. Dominion. Colonies had survived, their people saved by human sacrifices. The corrupted fleets that had fallen to the Shadow's influence were gone, destroyed in the collapse. But the signal remained, faint, fractured, echoing from the far edge of space. A reminder that what they had fought here was only a fragment of something far larger. In the Dominion capital, the council gathered again, but the chamber was changed. The voices that once shouted for war now spoke in whispers, each minister weighed down by what they had seen. They could no longer deny the truth. The humans had not been predators hunting for conquest. They had been guardians, standing in silence, between the galaxy and the dark. And now, many of them were gone. News spread quickly across Dominion worlds. At first, there was confusion. Civilians asked why the humans had thrown themselves into the fight. Why had they protected those who had once feared them? The answer, slowly, became clear. The Deathworlders did not fight because they were cruel. They fought because they understood what it meant to live on the edge of extinction. For them, survival had always been war. And when faced with the Shadow, they had carried that burden for everyone. The officer submitted his final report to High Command, though he knew it would never capture what he had witnessed. He spoke not of tactics or losses, but of resolve. Of how the humans had pressed forward when no one else would. Of how their signal had anchored minds against corruption. Of how their silence had not been arrogance, but grief. He ended his report with simple words. We misunderstood them. We called them Deathworlders. But it was their world of death that taught them to fight for life. Survivors from Dominion fleets began to share their accounts. Pilots spoke of human squadrons diving into enemy fire to shield them. Captains told of human ships breaking formation to protect civilian transports. Even soldiers who had once cursed the humans admitted they owed their lives to them. Slowly, a new story spread through the galaxy, one not of fear, but of respect. The humans had left more than sacrifice behind. Hidden among the wreckage were encrypted data cores, deliberately jettisoned before their final charge. Dominion engineers recovered them, discovering maps, warnings, and records of battles fought long before this one. The humans had cataloged the Shadow's movements across distant space, tracing its origins back further than any Dominion record. It was not just one fleet. It was a vast network spread across the stars, consuming civilizations one by one. The battle here had been only the beginning. This revelation reshaped the Dominion. Where once their fleets had been scattered and self-serving, now they began to unify, training not for border skirmishes, but for survival against a greater threat. Officers studied human tactics, adopting their brutal efficiency and resilience. Civilians carried the memory of the human signal, a steady pulse that became a symbol of defiance. Songs were written in its rhythm, stories told to children so they would not forget the strangers who had come uninvited, yet saved them all. The officer on the frontier station remained at his post, though his eyes often drifted to the stars where the humans had vanished. He replayed the signal often, letting its steady beat fill the silence. To him, it was not just a memory, but a promise. The humans had fallen here, but somewhere out in the void, others still fought. The fractured signal that lingered was proof. They were not entirely gone. They were still holding the line, somewhere beyond reach. As months passed, the Dominion Council declared a new alliance, not with the humans themselves, for none had returned, but with their legacy. They called it the Pact of the Signal. Its vow was simple. When the Shadow returned, as all knew it would, they would not face it divided. They would fight as one, just as the humans had shown them. The galaxy changed in subtle ways. Where once Deathworlder was spoken as an insult, it became a word of reverence. Their endurance was no longer seen as barbarism, but as strength. Their silence no longer mistaken for menace, but for discipline. The humans had rewritten their place in galactic memory, not by words, but by sacrifice. Still, the Shadow remained. The faint signal that pulsed from the distant void was a constant reminder that the war was not over. Dominion scientists debated its origin, some arguing it was a distress call, others that it was a lure. But the officer on the frontier station believed something different. He believed it was a warning, a message to all who listened. We are still here. Keep fighting. Years later, when new recruits arrived at the station, they were told the story of the battle. They were shown the recordings of the human fleet, their black hulls shining against the stars, their formations unbroken even as fire consumed them. And they were taught to listen to the signal, to let its rhythm steady their hands and steel their resolve. The officer, older now, stood before them and repeated the same words he had written long ago. We misunderstood them, but in the end, they showed us how to live. The galaxy had been changed forever. The Dominion was no longer the same empire, the frontier no longer the same line. The humans had crossed their borders not to conquer, but to protect. And in doing so, they had left behind more than wreckage. They had left a legacy of unity, one born from the most unlikely of saviors. The signal still echoed, faint but steady, its beat carrying across the endless dark. It was not the sound of war anymore. It was the sound of defiance, the sound of life refusing to yield. And for those who heard it, whether in the heart of the Dominion or on the edge of the frontier, it was enough. The humans were gone, but their message remained. The war against the shadow would continue, and when it came again, the galaxy would be ready. The officer stood at the viewing deck one last time, watching the stars. He thought of the faces he had never known, of the ships that had vanished into fire, and of the silence they had left behind. And then, faintly, he felt the pulse of the signal once more, steady in his chest. The Deathworlders had come. They had fought. They had given everything, and they had left the galaxy stronger than they had found it. The story ended not with conquest, not with fear, but with a promise carried on the rhythm of a signal, a promise that as long as it echoed, no one would ever face the dark alone.